Most people treat discipline as a mental game. They believe that if they just try harder, push more, or build better habits, they'll finally become consistent. But here's something most people miss. Discipline is not primarily a mental strength. It is deeply connected to the state of your nervous system. When your nervous system is in a regulated state, the parts of your brain responsible for focus, decision-making, and following through have good access to energy and resources. This makes it easier to do what you said you would do. However, when your nervous system is stuck in a low level of stress or shutdown, those same brain regions have reduced capacity. Your body is prioritizing survival over long-term goals. This is why many people set ambitious plans in the morning only to watch their willpower collapse by the afternoon or evening. This isn't about lacking motivation or character. It's about the biological state your body is operating from. When your nervous system feels unsafe or overwhelmed, even simple acts of discipline can feel disproportionately difficult. You may know exactly what you need to do, but your system struggles to follow through. This is why true, sustainable discipline doesn't begin with trying to strengthen your willpower. It begins with creating the conditions where your nervous system can operate from a place of safety and regulation more consistently. When your body feels safe, discipline becomes less about forcing yourself and more about following through on what already feels aligned. In the coming videos, we will explore how to build this kind of discipline, one that doesn't rely on constant motivation or self-punishment.
Many people confuse discipline with force. They believe that being disciplined means pushing through resistance, overriding their feelings, and making themselves do things even when they don't want to. While there is some truth in this, ancient traditions saw a much deeper distinction between force and real inner strength. Force is external. It often comes from pressure, fear of consequences, or self-criticism. It can work in the short term, but it usually creates resistance and eventually leads to burnout. Inner strength, on the other hand, comes from a different place. It is built through repeated small actions that are aligned with your values and supported by a regulated nervous system. Ancient traditions understood that real strength doesn't come from constantly fighting yourself. It comes from developing the capacity to stay steady even when things feel difficult. This kind of strength is quiet. It doesn't require dramatic displays of willpower. It shows up in the small, consistent choices you make when no one is watching. This distinction matters because many people burn out trying to force discipline when what they actually need is to build genuine inner strength. Force drains you. Inner strength sustains you. This naturally leads us to look at how to build this kind of strength without relying on constant self-pressure.
One of the biggest reasons people struggle with discipline is that they approach it in a way that eventually leads to burnout. They set very high standards, push themselves hard, and then eventually collapse because the approach wasn't sustainable. Sustainable discipline works differently. It is built on small, repeatable actions that don't require heroic levels of motivation every single day. It respects your energy and your nervous system. It understands that consistency over a long period of time is far more powerful than intense bursts followed by long periods of doing nothing. The key is to lower the activation energy required to show up. When the action feels too big or demanding, your nervous system is more likely to resist it. But when the action is small enough that it feels almost too easy to skip, you dramatically increase the chances of staying consistent over months and years. This doesn't mean you should never challenge yourself. It means you should build your foundation with actions that are sustainable first, and then gradually increase the difficulty as your capacity grows. This is how real inner strength is forged, not through constant force, but through consistent, manageable effort over time. This brings us to an important distinction between motivation and something far more reliable.
Motivation is one of the most overrated concepts when it comes to building discipline. Most people wait to feel motivated before they take action. The problem is that motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes depending on your mood, energy, sleep, and even the weather. People who build real, lasting discipline don't rely on motivation. They rely on systems, identity, and small daily actions that don't require them to feel a certain way. They show up even when motivation is low because the action has become part of who they are. This is a much more stable foundation than motivation. When your identity shifts, when you start seeing yourself as someone who moves their body daily, or someone who protects their mornings, or someone who follows through, the need for motivation decreases significantly. Motivation can be a nice bonus when it shows up, but it is a terrible foundation for long-term discipline. What you need instead is a system that works even on the days when you don't feel like doing anything. This naturally leads us to look at what real self-mastery actually looks like.
Both Stoic philosophers and ancient yogis had a very clear understanding of self-mastery. They didn't see it as controlling everything around them. They saw it as mastering their own reactions, desires, and inner state. The Stoics talked about focusing only on what is within your control. The yogis talked about mastering the fluctuations of the mind. Both traditions understood that real power doesn't come from forcing the external world to behave. It comes from developing control over your own responses. This kind of self-mastery is quiet. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but over time, it creates an unshakable inner foundation. When you can stay steady even when things don't go your way, you become much harder to disturb. This is the real strength that discipline can build. What makes this especially powerful is that it doesn't require perfect conditions. It can be practiced in the middle of a difficult day, a stressful season, or even when everything feels chaotic. This brings us to the role of small daily actions in building this kind of strength.
Real inner strength is rarely built through dramatic, one-time efforts. It is built through small, repeated actions that compound over time. These actions may seem insignificant in the moment, but over months and years, they reshape who you are. The power of small daily acts lies in their consistency. When you do something small every single day, whether it's a short walk, a few minutes of breathing, or keeping one promise to yourself, you send a clear signal to your nervous system: I am someone who follows through. This identity becomes stronger than motivation ever could. The mistake many people make is trying to do too much too soon. They set huge goals and then burn out when they can't maintain them. Sustainable strength comes from starting smaller than feels impressive and then staying consistent for a long time. This is how real discipline is built, not in big dramatic moments, but in the quiet, repeated choices you make every day. This naturally leads us to one of the most important questions in building discipline. What do you do on the days when you don't feel like showing up?
The real test of discipline isn't what you do when you feel motivated. It's what you do when you don't feel like doing anything at all. These are the moments that separate people who build real strength from those who stay stuck in cycles of starting and stopping. When you don't feel like showing up, your nervous system is often in a state of resistance or low energy. Pushing through with pure force in these moments can sometimes work, but it often creates more resistance over time. A better approach is to lower the bar so much that skipping feels harder than doing the small action. This doesn't mean you should never rest. It means you should have a minimum version of your practice that you can fall back on even on difficult days. This protects the identity of being someone who shows up while still respecting your current capacity. Over time, these small acts of showing up, even when you don't feel like it, become some of the most important moments in building real inner strength.
This brings us to the quiet power of consistency. There's a quiet power in simply showing up consistently, even when the results aren't dramatic. Most people underestimate how much this matters. They want visible progress quickly, and when they don't see it, they lose motivation and stop. But the people who build real, lasting discipline understand that consistency compounds in ways that are often invisible at first. Small daily actions create identity shifts. They rewire your nervous system. They build trust with yourself. Over time, these invisible changes become extremely powerful. Showing up consistently is not about being perfect. It's about protecting the streak more than protecting the quality of any single day. When you miss a day, you don't just lose that day's progress, you weaken the identity you're trying to build. This is why consistency, even in small doses, is one of the most underrated forms of discipline. This naturally leads us to an important reframe around what discipline actually is. Many people treat discipline like a form of punishment. They use it to beat themselves up, to prove their worth, or to compensate for feelings of inadequacy. This approach might create short-term results, but it usually creates long-term resentment and burnout. Ancient traditions saw discipline very differently. They viewed it as an expression of self-respect. When you discipline yourself in a healthy way, you are saying, I respect myself enough to do what I said I would do. I respect my future self enough to make choices that will benefit me later. This shift in perspective changes everything. Discipline stops being something you force on yourself and becomes something you do for yourself. It becomes an act of care rather than an act of control. When discipline comes from self-respect instead of self-punishment, it becomes much more sustainable over time. This brings us to the final and most important idea in this pillar.
The highest form of discipline isn't about having more willpower. It's about designing a life where you don't need to rely on willpower as much. This means building systems, environments, and identities that make the right actions easier and the wrong actions harder. When your environment supports your values, discipline becomes less about fighting yourself and more about flowing with the structure you've created. When your identity shifts, you stop needing to convince yourself to do things. They simply become part of who you are. This doesn't mean life will never be difficult. It means you stop depending on constant internal battles to move forward. Real inner strength eventually becomes quiet. It doesn't require dramatic displays of willpower every day. It shows up in the calm, steady way you live your life. This is the kind of discipline worth building, not one that drains you, but one that quietly supports the person you're becoming over time. Thank you for walking through this pillar with me. If these ideas resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you liked the videos and subscribed to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.